Hi again then guys, and welcome to the last review of all of the cars from the 1.13 pack. This is the final one, the 80s Supra, with the 3-litre engine of course. We already had a premium Supra of this generation on GranTurismo 6, so unlike some of the others, it isn't a full conversion, as in something like the newer Supra was, which of course a ton of people wanted to have for quite some time. This one already had an interior, it already had the visual options, it already had better detailing, better physics, so this is a logical next step. It's a hugely popular car, an iconic JDM car, an iconic race car as well in a number of different forms, and so, of course, it's the kind of car that you'd want to bring back. It makes about as much sense as bringing back an R33 Skyline, which I think they probably will as well. But the main question, of course, is now that they have brought this one back, how good is it? And also, how competitive can it be? Because the Supra has a ton of potential to work with, but you can't necessarily make it quite as all-out insane. In particular with regard to straight line performance and top speed as you could on GranTurismo 6. On that game, it was actually one of the quickest JDM cars in the game, and it could even outrun stuff like the FD RX-7. Which is pretty impressive. Now, well, don't necessarily expect it to go that quick, but it certainly isn't slow. The handling is pretty good. It is a heavier vehicle, it weighs 1,530 kilos. The power isn't ridiculously high, but of course you can tune it, so that's not really an issue, and most people probably won't race it in its fully tuned form anyway. The torque is reasonable, the power is better, but it has a good amount of both, 266 horsepower, 263 pound-feet, and the fact that the engine is bigger anyway means that the torque is fairly effortless on this car. But as far as performance goes, around a track it feels like the kind of car that you need to use under the right circumstances. Now here at Bathurst, it's a car which is known in the past for racing here, and it's a car which, as I said, has numerous racing exploits and racing victories, both on and off-road. Personally, I actually prefer the rally versions of the Supra over the racing versions on the road, but either way it has a ton of potential. Now, in terms of how it slots into the game now, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's got a huge amount of competition, and that's probably one of the only drawbacks of the car, in a similar way to a couple of the other DLC cars that we've had so far, such as even the F1500 TA, which again is kind of alone in the game. With the Supra it's not quite so bad, because of course you could take it up against others if you wanted to, like the R32 Skyline or various others, but to some degree it feels like we need to have more for this one to really come into its own. Especially when it comes to 80s JDM, because we don't have a ton of that in the game at the moment. It's mostly 90s stuff, which is the obvious route to go. That's where most of the legends are from. The RX-7, the Supra, the Skyline, they kind of came into their own in that generation, but the 80s is a very notable one as well, and a lot of fan favourites came from that period. The FC RX-7, this generation of Supra, the A86 from Toyota, various others as well, and this is one of the most powerful examples of a JDM car from the 80s in the franchise. So, although it has a ton to live up to, one of the great things about the Supra, and this goes for any Supra, but certainly this one, it has such a huge fan following that it would be very difficult really for people to be completely disappointed by it, even if it turned out to be bad, because people have so much love for it that they'll kind of just forgive it for whatever, even if it were bad. Now, it's not bad, it's not even close. I would recommend, however, dropping the weight, because it's a pretty heavy car. Compared to a lot of other JDM models, it's quite a bit heavier in fact, especially given it doesn't even have all-wheel drive or anything like that. Now, in terms of when and where you should use the car, well, the category is fairly low on it, so you've got a good amount of room to move. You can detune it, of course, tune it up as well, but as I said just now, the main thing by far is the weight. If you can get rid of that weight, then the car will pretty much take care of itself, the performance will take care of itself, and in a funny kind of way, it sort of reminds me of a muscle car in that sense. It's a bigger, boxier, heavier rear-wheel drive vehicle with quite a lot of torque in relation to its power, which doesn't necessarily need to be tuned up that much in terms of its engine to accomplish a lot. It's already got a pretty good amount of straight line performance for the lower categories, so as long as you drop that pretty hefty weight, the rest really will take care of itself. Now, it is definitely more tail-happy than the equivalent GTR would be of the time, but that's something which the Supra's pretty much always had. The later Supra, as well, is a much, much more tail-happy car than the R33 or the R34 is. So that's nothing new, really. People already know that. But at the same time, it does mean that, as well, you could quite potentially and quite justifiably use it as a drift car as well. Why not? It's got the potential there, kind of like a cross between, say, a Silvia in terms of the drift ability and more of a conventional Supra, the later generation, for instance, in terms of the kind of straight line speed and power which you'd expect it to have. It's a good middle ground between those two kinds of JDM car, because although you could go into subcategories pretty much endlessly, I often think of JDM cars as being kind of in three distinct camps. You've got the all-out speed kings, which is the likes of the later Supra, the R33 and R34, the RX-7FD, the NSX. Then you've got the ones which are more rally inclined, which is stuff like the Evo, the Impreza, the older Celicas. And then you've got the third category, which is stuff which is more of a drifter, and that's like your S chassis vehicles, or something like an RX-8, for instance, those kind of things. They can be used in other forms of JDM competition, but that's kind of where their wheelhouse is, and that's what they're good for. With the Supra, as I alluded to just now, it is one of the relatively few, not really, but I think you know what I mean, that can, in a very fluid way, move between those different camps. And in a funny kind of way, it can actually move between all three of those categories. It's a great rally car, it's great as a road racer, and it's great as a drifter. And that is one of the great things about this generation of Supra, which, to be honest, the newer one doesn't really have, because the later Supra, although incredible in a straight line, and certainly competitive for racing when turned into a race car, such as for JGTC, it's not as much of an off-roader. That is where this car kind of has it beaten, even though it is the older of the two. Overall, though, it is a fan favourite. It was a fairly obvious choice to bring back, and one which I know a ton of people are very happy about. For me personally, I'm not a huge fan of this one. I prefer the newer Supra, which probably doesn't sound that outlandish. A lot of people do. This one, though, will certainly please the fans. It sounds better. It's got more detail upgrades, as many of the cars do, as you'd hope they would, of course. And with a price tag of 40 grand, it's not very expensive either, so you can get it pretty easily. But that's it overall for all of the cars from the 1.13 patch. Of course, the next one, I believe, should be potentially 1.15. We'll have to see, because sometimes they do those maintenance updates in between. But for now, that's it for the pack, so now we can move back into stuff like the existing reviews that we hadn't already covered, and more importantly, tuning. So special projects, off-road tunes, circuit tunes, drag tunes, and of course, stick around on the channel for all of those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.